Hollywood loves a good film about living through the apocalypse. Think The Road, I Am Legend, 28 Days Later, or Contagion. And since the coronavirus emerged, there's been a surge in people watching them again. And why wouldn't they? Feels a bit like we could be living it, doesn't it? In fact, there are some out there preparing for Armageddon as COVID-19 continues to spread. Now, it's unlikely this virus will reach apocalyptic levels, but what if we were hit by something that did? What if you were one of the last survivors left on the planet? If civilization was wiped out, would you be able to start over again? Now, I don't even know how to start a fire or grow my own food, but my next guest probably can. Lewis Dartnell is a professor of science communication at the University of Westminster and the author of The Knowledge, How to Rebuild Our World from Scratch. He joins us now from London. Lewis, really good to have you on the Newsmakers.
Hi, Imran.
I have a really interesting relationship with your book because I read it a few years ago and it was sort of a nice, fun thought experiment, right? I've forgotten everything I learned in that book, by the way. But then I always thought, I'm going to sort of keep this just in case things go south. I'm going to keep this book handy. I'm going to keep it at the front of my bookshelf. And over the past couple of months, as I sit in my study, I've started glancing over at your book and going, maybe I've got to go and dip back into this thing now. Maybe things could reach a level where it necessitates me needing some of the skills in this book. Have you found other people have turned to you and your book now during the COVID-19 era?
Yeah, so there has been a bit of an uptick in interest in this book, in The Knowledge, as it's published in England, but it has been translated into Turkish as well. And I feel I should stress that this book, it is a thought experiment, and it uses as a premise some kind of global reset, some kind of apocalyptic event, whether that is a super volcano or an asteroid strike or a nuclear war or whatever. But the world that we take for granted today in each of our normal everyday lives disappears. And the question that the book then sets out to answer is, well, what next? What could we actually do as individuals today to go about avoiding another dark ages and rebooting civilization from scratch to accelerate that process of recovery as quickly as possible, if only you had the most useful knowledge and technologies and understanding written down in a kind of manual for a kind of DIY book for civilization itself. And that's what The Knowledge tries to be. I wrote...
Yeah, sorry, please continue. Sorry for interrupting you.
I was just saying, I wrote The Knowledge 5-6 years ago now, and some of this has become quite pertinent now with the current global pandemic of the coronavirus, of COVID-19, which it will not cause a collapse of civilization. That this isn't an existential hazard we're looking at compared to something like an asteroid strike.
Right.
But a lot of our normal everyday lives are being impacted in a very, very significant way. UK has now been on lockdown for 6 weeks, and a lot of the things that we just took for granted, we're not able to get access to. We weren't able to get to a supermarket for several weeks. A lot of very basic commodities and day-to-day items started running out. And so a lot of people around the world have now been thinking and kind of asking themselves, what is it that supports my everyday life? What is going on behind the scenes in this global industrialized economy that just makes things magically appear on the shelves when I need them? And in the crux of it, that's what The Knowledge is all about. What is the invisible infrastructure behind the scenes that provide for our everyday lives?
The invisible stuff that we take for granted. And one of the humbling aspects of reading the book was that I felt, how do I not know this? How did my education fail me? I mean, I went to school, I went to 3 universities, dropped out of 2 of them, but I went to 3 universities. Like I'm not an uneducated person, but I don't know some of the fundamentals of how to survive. And we are sort of at the top of this pyramid of knowledge, standing on the shoulders of giants, and we don't know how things work, right? So after reading your book, I look at some very basic mundane things in life, and I think, well, actually, I can't deconstruct this thing. I don't know how it works. And I guess now that we're in a crisis, and it might not be the apocalypse, is it an opportunity for us to become literate, whether it's a sort of a science literacy or just a pragmatic literacy, Lewis?
Yeah, I think in a sense that the reason most of us don't know all of these things already, we don't have particularly well-honed survival skills or wilderness skills, is simply because we don't need them. You do live in a modern industrialized civilization. And the whole point about why our modern world is so capable and productive is because everyone within that society has their own particular job. They have a particular role, whether they are a police person or a scientist or a tax accountant. Everyone has their own specific role that they do very, very well, and everyone else therefore supports each other in a society. And at school, for our education system, that just needs to educate and train the next generation in the skills that will be useful to keep the economy and our society from running. And thankfully, at the moment, that doesn't mean having everyone knowing how to farm and grow food for themselves, for example, because we have tractors and fertilizers and farmers that know how to do that. But what we are seeing now with this coronavirus pandemic again is that people are being trapped at home, and we've a lot of us getting this opportunity to start questioning what we do take for granted and where it comes from, and trying to address some of this issue, some of this feeling of disconnect with the modern world. That, you know, if our mobile phone breaks down, I don't even know how to repair it. I can't even change the battery in my mobile phone. I have to throw it away and get a new one on the contract. And what we are seeing a lot of with people in lockdown, with their children at home at the moment, is people reconnecting with these basic skills of crafting and making things for themselves. Certainly in the UK, a lot of shops and online shops sold out of seeds very, very quickly. People are turning their hand to just simple things like growing tomatoes or growing herbs for themselves, or they're buying kind of construction kits that they can use with their kids to play, but ultimately learn something important about how things are constructed, how they work. If you needed to, how could you go right back to basics, right back to scratch, and reconstruct everything for yourself?
I've been baking bread, but I guess the next the next stage is to.
Do you have your own sourdough starter culture, Imran?
No, I don't, unfortunately. I've just been using like
So
packet yeast, you know. So the next step will be kind of sourdough over 3 or 4 days, and then maybe I'll become a farmer in a few months, right? I guess we are a very advanced global civilization, very interconnected civilization, and there's two sides to that coin. Have the past 3 months been a reminder of just how fragile that civilization is?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And to compare what we're going through today to another global pandemic of the 14th century, of the bubonic plague, the Black Death, which again, I would stress is much, much more serious than what we are currently facing. But the bubonic plague spread around the known world at the time, across Eurasia, from the East and China to Europe, via Arabian Peninsula in the Middle East, along the trade routes at the time, which were the Silk Roads, these overland trade routes. And what we've seen with this current pandemic is that, perhaps unsurprisingly, it spread along the modern day Silk Roads, which are the intercontinental flight paths of airlines. In today's modern world, we are effectively living in an environment which is perfectly set up for the very rapid transmission of diseases. Most of the world's population today lives in very dense, concentrated populations in cities. It's easy for disease to jump from one person to the next. And we effectively teleport from one continent to the next with flights. It takes you less time to get from one continent to another than it does for that disease to start making you sick. So we are seeing this coronavirus outbreak, and this will definitely not be the last global pandemic that hits us. It is, in a sense, a feature of the way that our world works today. And one of the consequences of this global pandemic, as you say, is a slight jolt, a wearing down slightly of how our civilization works in terms of global production and redistribution, and in particular systems like just-in-time delivery. So it seems quite frivolous to mention this, but certainly in the UK, we started running out of toilet paper. People couldn't go to the supermarket and get toilet paper, not because we ever ran out of paper or trees that toilet paper is made from, but there was just a simple constriction in the pipeline that got toilet paper from the stock warehouses to the supermarkets and then into people's houses. And as a frivolous example with toilet paper, we are seeing that with more and more things now as this global pandemic continues, with personal protection equipment, PPE, medical supplies, and we'll start seeing it in more and more fundamental commodities if things like global trade does slow down because ships can't move from port to port and move that material around.
Brilliant. Lewis Dartnell, been a pleasure talking to you. I've read your book once. I'm currently on my second read. This time I'm paying a bit more attention. Maybe it's because I've got small children as well. I don't know. There's some sort of survival instinct in there, but brilliant. This was wonderful. Thanks so much, Lewis Dartnell. Good to have you on.
Thank you, Imran. Cheers.
Bye-bye.